Father, we come to you to learn from you. And God, we want to come with a fresh perspective and an openness. We thank you for the things that you have presented to the teachers for us to go through. And I pray that we would all engage in them, knowing that your spirit is in it if we look for it. And so I pray that we would find you in what we talk about today, because we are looking for you and we are with you. I pray that you would always be our priority and that everything else would fall in line with that. Thank you that that is possible and that it is your desire. Amen.
All right, quick show of hands. Who has not shared their own? For your experience, the person's experience with Jesus, yeah. So let's see, just 3. 1, 2, 3, just 4 of us. Is that right? So everyone else has? Okay. And then you guys are heading out pretty soon, yeah? So
This Tuesday.
it's a week from today? Okay. And then you guys will be gone for a couple weeks. So
2 weeks.
Oh, wait, is it 2?
At least my mom will be gone.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So we'll plan on doing your guys' when you get back.
Okay.
But then, do I have let's have at least just one volunteer for next week to share? Uno.
Maybe next week. Oh.
All right, arm wrestle. Who wants?
Esther, do you want to, or? I don't care. I didn't read today. I'll let you.
Okay, Esther, you're on for next week. All right, so before we open it up to a teaching time, this was a pretty significant week, at least as far as the reading goes and the narrative goes. And so, like, any observations that you guys have, or things that stood out to you, or did you guys anticipate the events were going to transpire, or no? If so, why or why not?
Caitlin knows.
At least I honestly felt like I was really slow to realize it once. Like, I realized it when Jennifer was telling them all these things about Jesus. And I'm like, oh wait, Jesus can heal his mother and sister. And I'm like, why didn't I realize that before? Because it makes a lot of sense with how the story's been going so far.
Anyone else?
I'll go on record and say that frame 1, I saw leprosy. I'm like, Jesus is going to heal them.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Kayla about it, and we had 2 conflicting things. And hers was like, oh, they're going to die of leprosy. That's going to humble them. I'm like, I really hope that doesn't happen.
Okay, I changed my mind, to be fair.
Right.
No, I just remember one Friday morning we were having a conversation about it. I'm very happy that my prediction turned out accurate, because I thought it was nothing more than a hopeful dream. But it was the exact ending I was hoping for. So now all investment I had in the story for personal gain is satiated. From now on, I'm satisfied.
So you feel resolved in the storyline now?
The 2 characters that I cared about are safe and okay. That's it, yeah.
Okay. Other thoughts? So others anticipated that, right? You see leprosy and you're like, oh yeah, this is...
Yeah, I didn't realize it until that day.
A little bit of Amrah too, and nothing to do with her. That was also nice.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about her today and framing the story. And there's a beautiful expression in her life that is a good example for all of us. And it is juxtaposed to what continues to be Judah's difficulty in coming to understanding the kingdom within. And my hope is today to maybe poke holes in our own way of thinking. Because I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we might really desire to be Amrah. But we might be a lot more like Judah than we are like Amrah. And I say that because, well, twofold. First is just so we maintain proper perspective here, right? I certainly don't want to undermine the good work that is going on in us, but it is very easy for us to oversee those areas that are not easy, right? And Jesus came to heal people who had what? Leprosy. Well, this begs again the question, we've talked about it before, but what is leprosy?
It's like a slow death.
Yeah. It's an infirmity, it's a malady, right? It is a death sentence. For those who experienced this back in that time, you were guaranteed to die. That was a basic promise. And it was not the kind of death that was expedient, right? Your body is slowly decaying, inside and outside. Body parts and limbs would fall away, skin would slough off, you would become very, like, as we've seen, like white as snow. Your hair would lose its color. You would, one of the first things that would go on with a lot of people is their dental issues, like teeth fall, all of that. So, but then let's not just look at in the physical realm of what took place as a disease, because that's one thing, right? Like throughout all of human history, we can observe that there have been infirmity and sickness and disease. And really then what we can also look at is, from a cultural standpoint, how people treat those who are marginalized and sick and poor is really significant. Like you can tell a lot about what a culture values by how they treat their elderly, how they treat the poor, how they treat the infirm. And so then let's talk about not just leprosy from the perspective of physical, but what was the moral implication for a Jewish person at this time when they saw leprosy? What did they see? What did somebody having leprosy mean to most people?
Unclean.
That they were unclean. But what's specifically about that, right? Because they say that, right? We say unclean, but what does that really mean? What's at the heart of that?
Sin.
A sin, right? They're impure. They are sinful. The only way that this could have happened to them is if they had some great sin. And so it's not these minor sins, right? But this is a major sin that they have committed. Well, let's again look at the narrative here, because had we lived in that time and been of that culture, we would likely be sitting around this table, more likely than not, and talking about Tirzah and her mother and what sin did they commit. Right? That would have been very commonplace. Right? To assess something and judge something when you lack a certain kind of perspective or insight, right? The Bible talks about that a lot, right? Are we to, well, let me ask you this first question. Are we to judge? What does the Bible say? Are we to judge? Okay, so this is a trick question. Yeah, we do judge, but how should we judge? Right? We're gonna judge angels. Like we have an authority to make assessment or judgment. But right, like when we think of a courtroom, right? What we hope for or anticipate in the context of legal terminology and there to be a judge there. What kind of judge are we hoping for? A good judge, a just judge, a righteous judge, a fair judge? And we would say, right, that what we're hoping for in that person who sits in a seat of judgment is that they are using wisdom and applying the law, right? And so it's not that we are unable to judge, right? Because in the best sense of the word judge, we are to discern, right? You make judgments hopefully all the time, right? Like what is right or what is wrong. Well, in some ways, those are really easy decisions to make, right? Like there's things in your life that you just kind of know, like I would never ever do that. Like that's just obviously no. But what about all of those things that kind of hover in this middle ground? Those areas where they're a little bit harder to discern. Let me take this a step further. I want to make some assessment in our own hearts about how we consider others. Because we can look at the people we're closest to, And it's very easy for us to say we love them, right? We would do whatever. But let's consider those who are minor annoyances to us, who we don't really fully like the way that they think, or the way that they talk, or the way that they act is not the way that we would act. And there's just maybe some distance that we put between ourselves and others. Is it not safe to say that at times we are fully capable of judging people in the worst sense possible? Where they have become like those who have leprosy, right? They're unclean. That's a perspective that comes where? Within our own hearts and our own minds, and has to be assessed differently, right? And so the judgment that one should use is through what lens of judgment? How do we assess? Well, let's make it super easy. How should we assess the world? Should we judge the world? What do you think? What kind of judgment should we judge the world? I think we should. I think we should hold a judgment against the world, but not in the ways that are unhealthy and soulish. But don't we judge the world by not becoming mixed up in it? Right? That's a judgment, right? That's a dividing line, right? You're not going to participate in the world's way of doing things because you're making an assessment, a judgment. This is a line I won't cross. And that's an obvious line, right?
Like a standard?
Standard, yeah. But that's a judgment we make to stand in this area. But see, when judgment becomes unhealthy, it becomes pointed and directed and personal. Well, no, we hold the standard, right? We hold ourselves in a position of being judged, right? Being assessed. Well, then let's get into these more tricky places, right? Again, I want to invite us into this conversation a little bit because it actually is within the heart of Amrah that we see this real beauty that is so distinct from other characters, right? Like we see within Masala's life a real clear judgment that he has made, right? And his judgment is unrighteous. And then we look at Iris, right? And we can say her judgment or her assessment of the world and herself is really an unrighteous judgment. And we can even look at Judah and see in many ways like Judah is his judgment, even towards Masala, who kind of deserves some of his frustration, right? Is kind of unjust in the way that he goes about it. How he holds and maintains his life, right? And this is important to the narrative here. And why would Lou Wallace use leprosy and not some other maladies that are biblical? Because leprosy is kind of the worst of the worst of the worst conditions, right? This is death without being dead. You are the walking dead. It's actually, leprosy is where we get a lot of the modern construct of the idea of zombies. People walking around with, mindless, there's a physical body, but there's nothing to them. They're soulless. Again, I want us to see this really clearly. I'm going to read, actually it's in the book of James. It's in the second chapter of James. The whole first section is about favoritism. And this is it's going to get to the heart really here of why Amrah does what she does. I want you to consider for a moment whether you think you demonstrate favoritism towards anyone. And if so, I want you to explore why. And if you do show favoritism, are there those that you can readily identify with, or are you somebody who can move beyond this? This is something James is trying to address. And he talks about the perfect law, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. And then he goes down in verse 9 of chapter 2. He says, but if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in just one point is guilty of breaking it all. Now this again gets into the language that we all know, right? To sin once is that is what separates, right? All sin separates. Now let's put that on the shelf over here, but then let's talk about the sinless one, right? In Jesus' expression of love, to lay down his life for others, right? This is what makes this kind of sacrificial love perfect, right? Because he keeps the law and he holds himself to the judgment, strict standard of the law, and yet he lays down his life for whom? Who does Jesus die for on the cross? For the Father, yeah, first, as an act of obedience. So that's the first place it starts, right? That's the source of it. That is done unto the Father for obedience. But then who is he trying to then redeem? Which kind of people? Perfect people? Sinless people? Or broken people? See, this really gets, I think, to the heart of what Amrah represents in her leading people to Jesus. She doesn't look at the obvious brokenness of the bodies. She doesn't even look at what she would have likely considered in her time. It would have been normal for her to consider the moral failure of the mother and Tirsa. That's not something she contends with. Why? Because there's a quality that we see within her, right? That it's a little bit set apart and distinct from others. She's an outlier, even in the culture. But she didn't do it. She didn't go to the mother and Tirsa merely because they were her favorites. And it wasn't just because she was a servant and that's what you were supposed to do for a master. Right? There's this love that we see within her heart, right, and her mind. And so, again, James here says it's a dividing line for us. If we sin in one thing, we're guilty of breaking it all. For he said, you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not murder. If you do not commit adultery, but you do commit murder, you become a lawbreaker. And that's easy enough, right? But how does Jesus talk about adultery or murder? Right? It's not just the killing of a person, but Jesus will say, you call somebody a fool in your heart, and you just committed murder. That's a pretty high standard. Again, this is hopefully to elucidate for us how we ought to walk with one another. Because is it not easy for us to look at others who do things and say things and act in ways that we might not act in that way, and to stand in a place of judgment that is unhelpful and unrighteous, that actually does not lead people to the help that they need, but only creates dividing lines between us? You guys, I can say as somebody who has endured a life far apart from God, coming into Christian circles, and I can tell you how hard it was to overcome the judgment of where I'd come from. There's a stigma to it. He is from the world. He could not possibly understand. And fair enough, there was a lot that I did come from the world, and I couldn't understand. But I was there. In the same way, you guys, even those around this table and not around this table right now, if we're not careful, we can fall into the danger of making assessments or judgments of others that are unrighteous and are unhelpful. When really the assessments we should make is really, again, through the Spirit, this lens of the Spirit. How are we to act? Right? And this is what Amrah's character gets at. What are we to do when faced with not just the physical infirmity, but the moral infirmity of others? Because that's the condition of the culture. And so some of us, this is why, like when we ask the question, we're able to read this and say, I knew this was going to be, because we have the benefit of looking throughout Christian history, right? Biblical history, and say, Jesus healed lepers, so we know that this is going to be like, even if we didn't know that's how the story was going to end, that was our hope, maybe. But again, he is writing this book at a time where not everyone would have saw things through that lens. To tell most Christians that if I were to tell you a book about people that have leprosy and there's Jesus in it, what would you assume? But to tell that to people who don't have that cultural upbringing or understanding, they might go, what is leprosy? Who is Jesus? What does it matter? It's just a story. our assessments, you guys, the way that we relate to one another, how we deal with one another in our infirmities, says a lot about how we love. Right? And I think the Bible even says that. If we love those who love us, big whoop. That's Justin's translation. Right? Like, that's not a hard thing. That's not really all that difficult to do, to love someone because they've loved you. Right? That's really not. But man, Jesus tells us even to, like, he brings it, like, again, getting back to the earliest teaching of Shema, love the Lord your God. Right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Right? That's the primary love. And we can only love that way because God first loved us. That's the only way that love works. But the second commandment is like it, is to what? To love your neighbor as you love yourself. Right? And it's implied that we love ourselves. We love ourselves enough to take a breath. We love ourselves till we just spent some time at lunch. Right? We love ourselves to pursue the things that we like. And then we love one another, but that can take on a whole different level, right? Because, man, then when it gets into the other person, like this is true of God as well, we have to begin to like lay down our own lives in ways that are not super comfortable. And like, how do we generally like even engage with people, right? We usually flock to people that are like us in our thinking and do the things that we do and all of our preferences. But that will leave out, if we're loving others, that will leave out a big population of people, right? Again, I'm not saying that we love everyone at the same time equally. That's not what is being said. But do we neglect to love those who we perceive as broken? You see, Amrah's kind of love, Jesus' kind of love, seeks out that which is broken. Jesus, he will say, even to those who come with this attitude of like, they're all well put together. They've all got it figured out. Jesus will say to them, I came for the sick. I came for the broken. I came for the marginalized. If you think you are not sick or not broken or not marginalized, there's nothing he can do with that mindset. And it's not because he lacks the power to help. It's because they lack the ability to receive the kind of love and faithfulness that Jesus has. And so this is where we have to come to this real honest perspective of ourselves. Do we have room to grow in the ways that we love one another? My assessment would be certainly, absolutely. Looking at Justin, man, the things that Justin does, I feel like Paul the Apostle, man, the things I want to do, the things that I know that are good, I don't do those as much as I would like. And the things that I know I ought not do, man, I feel like those are the things that I practice. But there is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. So this is not a conversation to be condemned in, but a conversation to reflect upon how then, as a son of God, is the Spirit leading me into the law of life. Well, this law, this assessment, this judgment then comes in when we look at each other. The good, the bad, the ugly. We look at each other in our brokenness. We look in those areas where there's annoyances or frustrations, and we allow the Spirit of God to move in our hearts and minds. If and when we are intended to act. James will continue here. I promise I'll get to the purpose for this. He says, verse 12, now speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom. So the way that we actually overcome the wrong way that we judge one another is by being held to the standard of God, the judgment of God. Speak. We are to speak. Let our speech be judged by God, right? Don't be flippant in the way that we talk, but be disciplined in it. Act, right? Live in this way. And this is the important verse here, verse 13. Because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. You know what the people who have leprosy need? God's mercy. You know what, the person that annoys you, frustrates you, antagonizes you, that you may not like, that may not be your favorite, may not be the person that you are drawn to, you know what they need? God's mercy. You know what I need? God's mercy. Do you know what you need? God's mercy. And so this is really informative for you and I. It concludes by saying, mercy triumphs over judgment. It is the mercy that is going to be extended. Right? And it's not mercy, this kind of mercy, it's not mercy for mercy's sake. Again, I would point out to you that Amrah doesn't do it because it's the fashionable thing to do. It's definitely not. What she does is so countercultural. She's not doing it just because she wants to make a name for herself or be looked at a certain way. Right? There's a motivation in her life that causes her to speak and to act in a certain way. Right? This is a woman who has held really closely what secret from Judah for at least 3 years now. What's the secret she's kept from Judah?
His sister-in-law in her life.
And what we see in the narrative is that Judah has basically 3 years in, even though he's following Jesus, he's walking around with him, at this point in time, he's all but really fully given up, and in many ways has fully given up on any hope that his mother and sister are alive. But Amrah has been faithful for 3 years. And what we see in the narrative is faithful in 3 years, that she was getting up constantly, consistently, and doing what? Bringing food, bringing water, bringing encouragement, bringing word to the mother and Tirzah, the sister, of all that Judah is doing. Right? She's like a lifeline to these people. But something shifts in our narrative here, right? Something changes. Amrah has been faithful for years. But why did Amrah not, in these 3 years preceding, why did she not dare to touch them? Why not? Why now? Why wait till now? What's the dividing line here between she didn't touch them and now she touches them?
She knew they were going to be healed.
Okay, let's look at the narrative. Thank you. Chapter 3. The first person to go out in the city upon opening of the sheep's gate next morning was Amrah, basket on arm. No questions were asked her by the keepers, since the morning itself had not been more regular in coming than she. They knew her somebody's faithful servant, and that was enough for them. What is that? Look at this assessment and the way that he uses their words, right? There's a perception of her that doesn't go beyond her just being a faithful servant. And yet, what we know, even in the narrative, for all of these years, she's been more than a faithful servant, right? She's been a faithful friend, a faithful holder of truth, right? Not just keeping secrets, but she's holding a truth for a time, right? She's treasuring this truth for a time. This is something she's holding on to with hope and anticipation. But there's a perception of her that actually is very, diminishes her in many ways. She's not merely a servant. There's way more to her story, right? And again, what does this tell us? Even the way that we assess people, even in their best attributes, sometimes can be very minimizing. The way we assess one another has got to be from a higher perspective. Now, this is again, it goes further than just, popular, terminology and flowery speech, right? But you and I are created, how are we created? In God's what? And likeness, right? And so then, if that is true, and I think that's true, and I think we all think that's true, then how ought we treat one another at all times? Should we relegate one another to our giftedness? Are we merely just a few of our good qualities? Who are we to one another? Right? Again, we see this is in the background here. Right? This assessment of Amrah is that she is, they knew her to be somebody's faithful servant. That was enough for them. There was no interest on their part to get to know Amrah's heart and mind. And that is a real heartbreaking, sad assessment. Why? Because you guys have had a glimpse into Amrah's heart and mind. Is she not more? Is she not infinitely more than someone's faithful servant? I mean, the way she acts in a chapter or two ahead is not merely a faithful servant. Because how many servants have probably gone to those places and served and fed, but not touched, not held? How many times have we done good things? You guys, this is not if anything is a criticism of myself. How many times have I done what is good, but not taken a step further to go deeper? How many times have I operated out of a place of religion, and not stepped into the heart of God? See, again, the way we can assess ourselves is how do we deal with those areas that take us beyond our capacity for goodness. Down the eastern valley, she took her away. The side, all of it darkly green, was spotted with white tents recently put up by people attending the feasts. The hour, however, was too early for the strangers to be abroad. Still, had it not been so, no one would have troubled her. Past Gethsemane. This is the place where Jesus will pray. Pray so intently, he will sweat blood. This is the place where Jesus will confront some of his disciples who fall asleep when he says, watch and pray with me. And he will come back to them and say, again, watch and pray. The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. This is where Jesus will say, Father, if it is possible for this cup, the cup of suffering, this death that he asked, this laying down his life for all mankind, and if it's possible for that to be removed, to do it. But nevertheless, he never wavers. Nevertheless, Father, not my will, but yours be done. Past the tombs at the meeting of the Bethany Roads. And the tombs represent clearly what? It's a place of death. The garden, Gethsemane, a place of life. The tombs, a place of death. Past the sepulchral village of Siloam she went. Occasionally the decrepit little body staggered. Once she sat down to get her breath, rising shortly, she struggled on with renewed haste. The great rocks on either hand, if they had ears, might have heard her mutter to herself. Could they have seen, it would have been to observe how frequently she looked up over the mount, reproving the dawn for its promptness. If it had been possible for them to gossip, not improbably, they would have said to one another, our friend is in a hurry this morning. The mouth she goes to feed must be very hungry. Right? Again, there is such an assessment, a judgment over her life that is just missing it. The way to resolve this kind of judgment and problem would be for them to just lean into relationship with her. A question can clarify so much. Amrah, why do you faithfully go to this place time and time and time again? Well, that question might be answered quickly. My master and her daughter have leprosy. And that might lead to a further question. But why would you be so faithful when you know the end is the way of death here? Is it not because of a great love that she has? But what changes between the time where she just brings food to the time she will touch is that she, without seeing him, just by hearing the story of Jesus, Amrah will develop a great faith in Christ. Now let's see how this plays itself out, you guys. We judge because we emphasize too much through the things that we see, how we assess with our eyes. But faith, Romans 10:17, comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ. Well, this is what Amrah's life represents. Amrah is a life of faith, one who has heard the stories of Christ, this man who has come into the scene to bring life to the marginalized, one who has raised people from the dead, one who has cleansed the lepers. And what's so beautiful about her is that she gets so excited, not because he resurrected people from the dead, but because he made people whole again from their lives. You see, what sparked in her is this hope. This great hope that if she can just maybe get Tirzah and her mom to Jesus, there can be some resolve. But as is true of any great act of faith, there is no guarantee for her. And so when she touches the flesh of that which is unclean, thus making herself unclean, it is at great risk to her own life. She is willing to go to the places of others' most brokenness. And we could assess this, right? We could say, well, she didn't do that for anyone else, so obviously it's because she favored them. I would say it's not because she favored them, it's because she loved them. Because love, the way that love works, right, it's not about choosing your favorites. Love empowers you to, well, again, Jesus said to love God, to love others as you love yourself. But then he also said this, that we are to love who's the other group of people that Jesus says to love? God, others, self. But there's another part of the others. The what? To love your enemies. And so love isn't about showing. Love is not about finding favorites. Because if we are commanded to love God and love our enemies and all points in between, right, that's like really a clear command from God about how we are to orient ourselves to one another. And we're honest with ourselves, right? This is not something that we can do apart from the empowerment of the Spirit. But we have to desire it, right? Well, this begs the question, who is the enemy, right? To Judah, the enemy was Messiah. And instead of loving Messiah, Judah walked in judgment of Messiah and enacted vengeance upon Messiah. Judah is not the example that we're to look at, right? We see really clearly that Balthazar is the example. Christ is certainly the example. But so is Amrah. Not merely someone's faithful servant, but we might say she is one who loved well. Moving forward a few pages. Thus the mother, not less tortured herself, sought to inspire the daughter, and Amrah came to her aid. To this time, the latter had not touched the persons of the afflicted, nor they hers, now in disregard of consequences, as well as of command. So she's not worried about the consequences, and she's doing it at what command? Well, what's implied here is that the command of the Spirit, the command of love. She's compelled. There's no other way for her to respond but to reach out and touch. What? The brokenness. Not the beauty. Not the perfection. And with no guarantee that this kind of faith would do anything, with merely a hope that if it's at all possible to get them to Jesus, maybe the miraculous can happen. See, this is where faith, right, is this. Faith is the substance of things what? Hoped for. The evidence of things not seen. Right? We cannot walk in faith by seeing all the outcomes and having it resolved in our sight. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing Christ. The faithful creature went to Tirzah and put her arm over her shoulder. I've got to say, for somebody who experienced a lot of the world, one of the most significant times in my life when I came to the church around Christian people, a lot of people just, I went to a young adults groups meeting. That's how I really got introduced to the church after I moved to California. And I just was lost. Like, they talked about things. It was over my head. I couldn't understand it. And there was such a judgment that was there. There was a man who actually, he lives back up in Washington again. His name is Pastor Frank Colcurcio. He came out of a really rough life as well. But I'll remember the first time where I felt truly embraced for who I was. In my brokenness. Accepted. Even in my brokenness. See, that's a different thing. What it's talking about here, this kind of embrace, again, I want you to imagine being the mother and sister who have for years and years and years not just been ostracized and set apart, right? Remember that part of the story where they were walled away from relationship except for one another. But now they're in a place where their hope is that in this beauty of getting to see their brother and the son, right? But never being able to touch them and experience it. But then to have the touch of a person who is whole, healed, being willing to come to you on that level. And we see this right in the mother's response, almost angry and indignant about it. Why? Because she's like, you're throwing your life away for me. I don't get it. I don't understand this. Hey, Amrah, what have you done? You forfeited your life, and that's kind of the point. And put her arm over her shoulder and whispered, lean on me. I am strong, though I am old. And it is but a little way off. There, now we can go. I just imagine in the back of Amrah's mind is this thought, if I can just get them to this Christ, he can heal them. If I can just get them there. I am old, but I will muster every bit of my strength if I can just lead them to Jesus. You see, this kind of heart posture, you guys, again, it is motivated out of love serving. But it is very instructive in the way that we ought to really consider the lives of those we've been entrusted with. And you've been, and I've been, entrusted with the lives of not just people we have everything in common with. And again, it's not wrong that we have people that we hang out with and do more things with and have a closer relationship with, but not at the cost of ostracizing others whom God has given us. See, what Amrah did is she waited on the Lord, and then the Lord provided her the opportunity. Later in the next chapter, entitled The Miracle of Us Giving Away, spoiler alert, what will happen? It says this: the knowledge we gain from much sympathy with others passing through trials is but vaguely understood. You see, I would contend this is that you cannot really truly get to know somebody until you really learn of their brokenness. And this then means that the way we really learn to love is through this place of real hardship and heartache. You can't appreciate who someone is when you don't know what somebody has gone through. Right? You know this in your own heart, right? In your own mind, in your own struggles, in your own difficulties. Do we not intuitively just know, like, if they could really understand what is in my heart and what is in my mind, if they could really see me for who I am. Like, is this not the testimony we've talked about with Christ? The way that he is able to see into a person and see who they truly are and call them forward into the person that God has called them to be. Jesus never leaves a person unchanged, except for those who are unwilling to change. The knowledge we gain from much sympathy with others passing through trials is but vaguely understood. Strangely enough, It enables us, among other things, to merge our identity into theirs, often so completely that their sorrows and their delights become our own. This goes beyond what the world has entitled empathy. Empathy has become a popular thing that I'll just tell people that I feel what they feel. And that actually does a lot of harm. And I can tell you this again from experience. I remember coming to the church and growing up with abandonment from my own father. And I remember people trying to tell me stories about other people in their life. Well, I had a friend who walked out on me once. Okay. I'm not sure that's the same as a 4-year-old who is weeping as their father is walking out. And again, it's not that it's a comparison, but see, that's what empathy tries to do is put on something so that we have some kind of relatability. And what love does is love tries to be invited into the heartbreak. Love doesn't need to try to fix things. Love listens. Love hears. So poor Amrah, aloof and hiding her face, knew the transformation the lepers were undergoing without a word spoken to her, knew it, and shared all their filling to the full. Her countenance, her words, her whole manner betrayed her condition. See, I will contend that this part of the book is not written for the sake of the healing of Tirzah and her mother, but it is written so that we might see what is necessary in our ability to love one another. Because our loving one another is always empowered where we take one another where? To the Christ, to the King, who can do what? Who can set right all that which has infirm or sick or weak or broken. Remember when as they were being healed too, how does he talk about, where does the healing start or take place? Do you guys remember?
The spirit.
Yeah, in the soul, right? In the inner parts. There's something that shifts and changes before their physical appearance changes. There's a radical transformation, right? And so what does that tell us about really what the healing of Christ is meant to bring about? Did Christ come to the earth and heal people of their physical sicknesses just so he could say, look, I made people physically well? Well, no, we know that to be true. Why? Because what happened to all of those people, even the people that Christ raised from the dead, like Lazarus, and the little girl, and the boy at Nain? What happened to all of those 3 people, even though they were resurrected? They eventually died again. The great miracle was not that Jesus could take a leper and make their body physically changed. The great miracles of Jesus were not that he could just pull Peter out of the water and make him stand on water. The great miracle of Jesus is not that he could walk by and somebody could touch the fringe of her garment and the issue of blood could just stop. The great miracles of Jesus is not just that he could take a legion of demons, throw them into some swine, and have the swine jump off a cliff. Those aren't the great miracles of Jesus. Those are pretty fantastic, right? And what is Judah's mindset as he's telling stories? It's all of that kind of language, right? Of course, Jesus came for a greater purpose, and that is to alter the condition of our soul. And what these chapters do is that it elucidates for us kind of the condition of the soul and its fleshly nature is like leprosy. We are slowly, without activation of the Spirit, right? We are slowly dying. Our soul is slowly dying. It's ebbing away. But Jesus brings life. But what is our role in that? Isn't our role not merely to just die to ourselves for ourselves, but to die to ourselves for the sake of others, to bring one another to Christ, to overlook the sins to cover the multitude of sins. It doesn't ignore it. It doesn't ignore the problem. It doesn't ignore the difficulty. It doesn't ignore the challenge. But this is the kind of faith then that leads us into touching, reaching out, and embracing those in their brokenness. Countenance, her words, her whole manner betrayed her condition, and with swift presentiment, he connected it with the woman he had just passed. He felt her presence there at the time was in some way associated with them, and turned hastily as they arose to their feet. His heart stood still. He became rooted in his track, dumb past outcry, awestruck. The woman he had seen before the Nazarene was standing with her hands clasped and eyes streaming, looking towards heaven. The mere transformation would have been a sufficient surprise, but it was the least of the causes of his emotion. Could he be mistaken? Never was there in life a stranger so like his mother. And like her, as she was the day the Romans snatched her from him. There is such beauty in the way Christ redeems us. And the only way that we get to see this, you guys, is becoming willing to bring one another in our brokenness to the Lord. The only way we can see this is to listen to the cry in one another's hearts, to get to know one another. Beyond those things that are okay and familiar and enjoyable. That is a blessing. For sure that is a blessing. But the testimony of Christ's life, what really is so radical about what Jesus did in his humanity, was that he took and he went to the places of everyone's most brokenness to draw out life in them. This resurrection life, you guys, is possible for all of us in the ways that we respond and love one another. Now, as I say this, again, let's draw some clear lines. This is not meant to elicit any condemnation, and it is not meant to elicit in any of us an attitude of like, well, now I'm going to go and do something. What it's meant for us to do is actually to go into the places of the soul where Christ wants to redeem and say, Father, Jesus, what am I to do? How am I to respond? Who am I to love? How am I to love? It is to be reminded that when we inevitably come up or come across areas of difficulty with others, that we are reminded of the kinds of love that Christ extended. Because it is the will of the Father that none should perish. Again, you guys, it's very easy for us to love those who love us. But love is proven out in those areas of difficulty. And the reality is that we need one another to help one another overcome those things that hinder us. Again, I came from a really broken place and came into a place where, man, for a long time it was a real struggle. And I'm thankful. I am so thankful for the people who didn't get it and judged me. And I'm thankful for the people who got it and didn't. Because all of it was a grace from the Lord. The fact that I was sitting in rooms, even to be judged, was a beautiful testimony that the Lord had brought me out of sure judgment in the world. But at some point in time, I had to then become accountable for myself and how I treated others. And so the Lord placed me for 20 plus years working with kids who had no parents, who were broken and hurting. And by the grace of God, I was able to do what? To reach out and to touch them in their brokenness. To minister to them when they were weak. And it's not always an easy task. For some of us, the person that we need to embrace in their brokenness is the person that looks back at us in the mirror when we look there. For some of us, the person that we need to bring to Christ is ourselves, to give ourselves permission to be broken. Now, what was the blessing of Amrah's obedience? It was the healing of the mother, and it was the healing of the sister, and it was the healing of herself, and it was a restored relationship. But what takes place within Judah? Stay, Judah, my son, come not nearer, the mother says. Unclean, unclean. The utterance was not from habit, grown since the dread disease struck her, as much as fear. And the fear was but another form of ever thoughtful maternal love. Though they were healed in person, the taint of the scourge might be in their garments ready for communication. So she's not just worried about her physical. Now she's worried about, like, maybe the garments aren't fully altered or changed. But there's also this fear within her of, like, what it would mean to be embraced by her son again. Like, this is just foreign, completely foreign ground for her. They were before him, and he called them. They had answer. Who or what should keep them from him now? Next moment, the three, so long separated, with mingling their tears in each other's arms. The first ecstasy over, the mother said, in this happiness, O my children, let us not be ungrateful. Let us begin life anew by acknowledgement of him to whom we are all so indebted. And I will end here. When it comes to how we ought to assess how we judge one another and relate to one another. Romans says this, let no debt be left outstanding but this. What is the debt we owe one another? To love. Why are we indebted to one another? Because Christ paid for us a ransom that we, if we lived all of our life collecting enough for it, are unable to pay. And so how do we pay this back in this sense, except through this command that Christ gives us to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so I am indebted to you, and you are indebted to me. And others are indebted to you, and you are indebted to others. To do what? To love. And love does what? It covers a multitude of sins. It looks beyond. It doesn't excuse. It doesn't permit. It doesn't avoid. It embraces. It takes the risk. But it takes the risk because the great hope is that Christ can bring reconciliation and healing. Ultimately, in the book of Corinthians, Paul will say, he's empowered by God to say that we are ministers of reconciliation. That is what Amrah represents for us. More than a servant, but somebody who understands without ever seeing it, but merely by hearing it, the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. Father, I do pray for us to be empowered with this kind of love. Lord, may we all take stock of ourselves and those you have entrusted with us, their lives to us, Father. May we walk in ways, Lord, at all times that is empowered by this love, that is empowered by a faith in you and a hope in you. Lord, that is willing to go through difficulties to arrive at your perfect plan. I thank you for the lives that are here, Lord, that you have empowered, that you have brought here. And what each life here represents, Father, is nothing short of miraculous. The way that you are healing and will continue to heal us inside out, Lord, empowering us to be those who walk fully in your image and likeness is such a beautiful sight to see. I thank you for the opportunity we have to walk in this way with one another. May we continually be reminded of the reality that we have a debt of love to express to one another always. Amen. All right, let's take a few minutes and we will jump back in.